After my wife passed, I was left a condemned auto repair shop on the edge of town while my daughter walked away with a $4 million lakefront home. The morning she read the will, she looked at me across the conference table and said, "Dad, you can't seriously think you're going to do anything useful with that." 3 weeks later, she handed me an eviction notice for the house I'd lived in for 31 years. I drove to that old garage with a rusted padlock and a key I'd never used. When I finally got the door open, I stood in the doorway for a long time, because what I saw inside was not what any of us expected. The attorney's name was Constance Webb. She had gray hair pulled back tight, reading glasses on a silver chain, and a voice that never wavered. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter throughout this because that's the only way I still know how to think of her, sat on one side of the conference table with her husband beside her. He kept his hand on the table like he was already signing something. I sat alone on the other side. Constance cleared her throat and opened the folder. To my daughter, Lydia Ann Bowen, I leave the primary residence at Whitetail Lake, Crawford County, Wisconsin. Appraised value $4,100,000. Additionally, the investment accounts managed through Lakeshore Wealth Partners, current value $2,800,000, and the retirement annuity through Anchor Financial, current value $1,200,000. Her husband squeezed Lydia's hand under the table. I watched his face. He didn't smile. He already knew. Constance turned a page. To my husband, Daniel James Bowen, I leave the property located at 42012 Old Meridian Road, Grant County, Wisconsin. Previously operated as Bowen & Sons Automotive. County appraisal $68,000. The room went quiet. Lydia blinked once, then turned to me slowly. "A garage," she said. "Your mother." "Dad." Her voice had no warmth in it at all. "You are 64 years old. What exactly are you going to do with the condemned auto shop?" Her husband opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Constance set a sealed envelope on the table and slid it toward me. Thick cream paper. My wife's handwriting on the front. "Open this at the shop, Daniel. Trust me." Those two words again. She'd whispered them to me in the hospital 10 days before she died. "Trust the shop, Daniel. Everything you need is there." I didn't understand then. I still didn't understand now, but I picked up the envelope and put it in my jacket pocket. Lydia stood. Her husband collected his coat. "We'll be filing to have the estate reviewed," she said to Constance. "This distribution is not what my mother intended." Constance's expression didn't change. "Your mother worked with our firm for 14 months on this estate plan. The documents are thorough and legally sound." Lydia looked at me one last time. "You should just sell it, Dad, whatever it's worth. You're not going to manage a property on your own." They left without saying goodbye. I sat in the conference room for a few more minutes after they were gone. Constance gathered her folders quietly and then paused. "Mr. Bowen," she said, "your wife loved you a great deal. I want you to know that." I nodded. I couldn't say much right then. She placed the key on the table in front of me. Old brass, worn smooth. Grant County, about 90 minutes south. Address is in the deed packet. I drove home to the house that wasn't mine anymore. My wife and I had lived there for 31 years. Raised Lydia in the upstairs bedroom with the window that faced the backyard maple. Refinished the kitchen floor together one summer when we couldn't afford a contractor. I knew every creak in that hallway, every draft under the back door in November. Lydia was already talking about renovations. She texted me twice before I reached the driveway. "Dad, I need to start the inspection process. Can you give me an availability window? Also, the financial planner my husband uses has a senior living program. Might be worth a conversation." I sat in my truck in the driveway and stared at the house. 40 years of marriage. A daughter I coached drew Little League and drove to violin lessons and watched walk across a graduation stage twice. She hadn't visited in 7 months before the hospice phone call. I went inside, walked upstairs, and started packing. She gave me 3 weeks. I wasn't going to use all of them. On the morning of the 9th day, Lydia knocked on the guest room door without waiting for an answer. She had a man with her, mid-50s, suit, the careful posture of someone who charges by the hour. "This is Gordon Price," she said. "He specializes in senior financial planning." Gordon set a folder on the dresser with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Bowen, your daughter has expressed some concern about your ability to manage independent finances, particularly given the complexity of the property transfer and your current income situation." I looked at the folder. The top page read, "General Durable Power of Attorney." I read the first paragraph. The language was smooth and legal and designed to make you feel like you were being helped. The word irrevocable was in the third line. I looked at Lydia. "You want control of the garage," I said. "I want to make sure you're taken care of," she said. I turned back to the document. Section 11. The agent may petition the court for full guardianship without prior notice in the event the principal is deemed unable to manage their own affairs. "And if I don't sign?" Gordon tilted his head slightly. "Wisconsin statute allows a family member to petition for emergency conservatorship. Given your age, recent loss, and current housing instability, a judge would likely grant a temporary order within 72 hours. I closed the folder and slid it back across the dresser. "Get out of my room." Lydia's jaw tightened. "Dad." I said, "Get out." They left. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened to them talking in low voices in the hallway. Gordon was saying something about a timeline. Lydia said, "He'll come around." She didn't know me as well as she thought she did. 4 days later, I was loading the last box into my truck when I noticed a manila envelope on top of the recycling bin in the garage. Lydia had been clearing out papers all week, going through my wife's filing cabinet. The envelope had slipped out and fallen against the side of the bin. The label on the tab said "Dad Options" in her handwriting. I opened this. Inside were 2 brochures, one for a place called Pinewood Senior Suites in Mineral Point, the other for Valley Ridge Assisted Living in Platteville. The second one had a sticky note, "Closer to us, easier for check-ins." Beneath the brochures was a contract. Resident name, Daniel James Bowen. Room type, shared occupancy. Monthly fee, $3,200. Security deposit, non-refundable. Move-in date, October 15th. I checked the date at the bottom of the contract. January 9th. My wife had still been alive on January 9th. She'd been in the hospital, but she'd still been alive. She was still asking the nurses to leave the window cracker so she could hear the birds. Lydia had signed the paperwork to move me into a facility while her mother was still breathing. I photographed every page, put the envelope back where I found it, and walked to my truck. Some things you can't unfeel after you felt them. That was one of them. I drove south. Old Meridian Road runs through the kind of countryside that doesn't get mentioned in travel pieces. Flat fields, grain elevators, a Dollar General every 15 miles. I passed through 3 towns where the main street had more closed storefronts than open ones, the kind of place where people stayed because they were from there, not because they chose it. Ford 12 was at the end of a gravel turnoff about a mile past the county line. The building was low and wide, cinder block walls, 2 bay doors rusted at the bottom, a hand-painted sign above the entrance that still read Bowen & Sons Automotive in faded blue letters. My father had started that shop. I'd worked the summers there through high school. When he died, my wife's family had inherited it through an old trust arrangement I'd honestly never paid much attention to. I parked and sat in the truck for a minute. The bay doors were padlocked. One of the office windows was boarded up with plywood. Weeds came up through the cracks in the parking lot. The lot light by the entrance was crooked, leaning maybe 10 degrees to the left. I got out. The key Constance had given me opened the side door. I stepped into the office. It smelled like motor oil and old paper and something I couldn't name. The specific smell of a place that's been holding still for a long time. An old metal desk sat against the far wall. A pegboard above the workbench still had a few socket wrenches hanging on it. In the corner was a filing cabinet with a small combination lock. On the desk were 2 envelopes. One was a sealed one from the will reading, my wife's handwriting on the front. The other was newer. Same handwriting. Read this one first. I sat down in the old office chair. It creaked, like it remembered me. I opened the first envelope. "Daniel, by the time you read this, you're at the shop. Good. I need you to do something before you open the sealed letter. Go to the back storage room." Behind the metal shelving on the north wall, you'll find a floor safe. Combination is our wedding anniversary, month, day, year. Everything you need to understand is inside. I love you, Cora. I read it twice. Then I got up, walked through the door into the garage bay, and found the storage room. The safe was there, exactly where she said. Black steel, floor-mounted, hidden completely behind a shelving unit loaded with old parts boxes. I moved the unit aside and knelt on the concrete. Month, day, year, June 18, 1984. The lock opened. Inside were 4 folders, neatly labeled in Cora's handwriting. 1 red tab, 1 blue, a third marked Environmental Survey, and a 4th marked Trust Documents. Resting on top of all of them was another envelope with my name on it. I sat on the cold floor of the storage room and read, Daniel, I need to tell you 3 things. First, Lydia has been taking money from us. Over the past 20 months, she moved approximately $240,000 out of our joint accounts and my business accounts. She forged my signature on 3 wire transfers and used our financial login credentials to reroute automatic deposits. I discovered it in August. I didn't confront her. Instead, I documented everything. The red folder has the bank statements, the transfer records, and the forged authorizations. I verified the signatures against originals with a handwriting consultant. There is no question. Second, Lydia has been working with a commercial real estate developer named Brock Alderman. He runs a firm out of Madison called Alderman Capital Group. He approached her 18 months ago with information that the property at 42012 Old Meridian has significant value she didn't know about. Together, they have been planning to have you declared incompetent, gain conservatorship of your assets, and sell the garage to Alderman Capital. The blue folder has their emails and the draft acquisition agreement. Third, the shop sits on an Environmental Protection Agency brownfield site that was remediated and cleared in 2019. Beneath the backlot is a groundwater collection system that qualifies for federal infrastructure credits. I've been working with a civil engineering firm, Holton Associates out of Madison, to develop the site as a mixed-use commercial property with historic preservation designation. The county has already approved the preliminary plan. The projected value of the development rights is between $8 and $12 million. The trust documents explain everything. I transferred the property into an irrevocable trust 18 months ago. Lydia cannot touch it. I know this is hard to read. I know you still want to believe she's the girl who used to fall asleep in your lap during Sunday baseball games, but she isn't that girl anymore. She made her choices while I was in a hospital bed. Protect yourself. Protect this property. I love you more than I ever said. Trust the shop. Cora. I sat on that floor for a long time. $240,000. While Cora was going through chemo, while I was driving her to appointments and heating soup and reading to her at night, Lydia was forging her mother's name on bank documents. I opened the red folder. The first page was a timeline in Cora's handwriting. March 4th, 2022, $38,000 wired from joint checking to account ending 4191. Cora's signature, 421 mine. Cora's signature forged on authorization form. Confirmed by comparison with authenticated samples. August 17, 2022, $72,000. Transferred from business savings to same account. Electronic authorization submitted from Lydia's home IP address. January 30th, 2023 to $130,000 moved from investment account via forged power of attorney submitted to Lakeshore Wealth. Total confirmed, $240,000. Discovered August 22, 23, monitored and documented for 6 months. Did not confront. Set the trap. I closed the folder. Set the trap. That was Cora. She'd spent her last healthy months collecting evidence against our daughter, quietly and without a word to me, because she knew I wouldn't have believed it. She was right. Even now, reading it in her handwriting, part of me wanted to find another explanation. I opened the blue folder. The first page was a printed email. From B. Doppelman at aldermancapitalgroup.com. Date, September 14, 2022. Subject, Opportunity 422 Old Meridian. Lydia, we spoke briefly at the Dane County Development Forum last spring. I've done some research on a property your parents own in Grant County. The remediation history and location make it attractive for a specific kind of development I've been pursuing. If you're interested in a conversation, I'd suggest we meet without involving your parents initially. Cora had circled the word initially and written in the margin he knew before she did. I kept reading. The next pages were screenshots of text messages. Brock Alderman and Lydia, October through December 2022. Alderman, Octime, what's your timeline on the estate? Lydia, Octime 9, Mom's prognosis is 6 to 9 months, maybe less. Alderman, Octine 9, we need to move before probate. Can you get conservatorship established? Lydia, Octime 1, working on it. Found an attorney in Madison who does elder law. Below the text was a wire transfer record. Alderman Capital Group to an LLC registered in Lydia's husband's name, $45,000. Consulting services. Cora had written beneath it, first payment. She became a paid consultant in her own parents' lives. The acquisition draft was at the back of the folder. Alderman Capital Group, purchaser. Daniel James Bowen, seller. Sale price, $350,000. Full transfer of development rights and mineral easements. Seller retains no future interest. Cora had underlined the development rights clause in red and written, real value, $8 and $12 million. He was offering 3.5% of what it's worth. I set the folder down. Outside the storage room, the garage was dark and still. I could hear the wind against the bay doors. My wife had seen all of this coming. While I was sitting by her hospital bed, not knowing what to say, she was building something I didn't even know I needed. I thought about Lydia handing me that power of attorney form, the brochure for Pinewood Senior Suites, the contract dated while her mother was still alive. I stayed on that floor a while longer. Then I put everything back in the safe, locked it, and walked out to the truck. I needed to think, but one thing was already clear. I wasn't signing anything. The next morning, a man knocked on the shop side door at 7:15. I'd slept on the old office couch under a wool blanket I found in the supply closet, which is not something I'd recommend, but it was mine, and I'd slept fine. I opened the door. He was about 70, work pants and a flannel shirt, with the kind of face that had spent a lot of years outside. He held a thermos in one hand and a paper bag in the other. "You Dan Bowen?" he asked. "Yeah." "Name's Pete Halverson. I own the feed store about 2 miles east. Your wife asked me to keep an eye on this place." He held out the bag. "Egg sandwich. Coffee in there, too." I stepped back and let him in. Pete put the food on the desk and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Cora gave me this about 8 months ago. Said to hand it to you when you showed up." The envelope was thick. Inside were $1,500 bills. "She paid me to check the property every week," Pete said. "Run off anyone who came sniffing around. Had a man in a Range Rover park out front about 3 months ago, took pictures. I got his plates." He placed a folded note on the desk beside the envelope. Called it in to a friend at the sheriff's office. Plates came back to a company called Alderman Capital. My jaw tightened. Pete poured coffee into the thermos cap and handed it to me. "Your daughter and that developer have been around Grant County the last few weeks, talking to the zoning board, the county assessor, asking questions about your title chain. She's already moving." "Yep." Pete sat on the edge of the desk. "Cora told me what she suspected. Didn't tell me all the details, but enough. She said if those two showed up asking questions, I was supposed to find you and warn you. She thought of everything." Pete was quiet for a moment. "She came out here a few times in the last year. Sat in the office for a while, walked the lot, had coffee. Once, she just stood out back by the old lift bay and didn't say anything for about 20 minutes. He paused. "I think she was saying goodbye to it." My throat tightened. "She also said to check the storage room again," Pete said. "Behind the safe, inside the wall stud cavity on the left side. She said you'd know what to do with what's in there." After Pete left, I went back to the storage room. I pressed along the left wall beside the safe until a panel gave. Inside the cavity was a metal box, fire-rated, the kind used for document storage. Inside, photocopies of everything from the safe, a USB drive labeled Evidence Attorney Copy, and a business card. Sandra Kowalski, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Western District of Wisconsin, Financial Crimes Division. I put the card in my wallet next to Cora's letter. 3 days later, Lydia arrived. I was on the shop roof replacing a section of flashing when I heard 2 cars on the gravel. I didn't climb down right away. I watched from the roof. Lydia got out of her car first. Blazer, heels, the look she wore when she was prepared to be reasonable in a way that wasn't really reasonable. The man from the second car took a minute. Early 60s, expensive vest over an open-collar shirt, silver hair swept back. He moved like someone accustomed to rooms that went quiet when he entered. That was Brock Alderman. I climbed down the ladder. Lydia saw me and softened her expression. "Dad, I'm glad you're here. This is a business associate of mine. He has a proposal that I think could really help your situation." Alderman extended his hand. I left it there. "Mr. Bowen," he said, pulling his hand back smoothly, "I've been following the development potential of this property for some time. I understand you're in a difficult position. The tax obligations, the structural condition, the liability of maintaining a non-operational commercial site. I'd like to make this simple for you." "How simple?" $750,000, cash. We handle all the back taxes, all the code compliance issues, all the liability. You walk away clean." I looked at Lydia. "That's more than 10 times the appraised value," she said. "It's generous, Dad." "Is it?" Alderman spread his hands. "The property requires significant investment to develop. We're taking on that risk." I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. "There's something I'd like you both to hear." I played a voicemail, not a recording I'd made myself, one I'd found on my wife's old phone, which Constance had included in a package of personal effects delivered to me after the will reading. Cora had recorded it herself, labeled it in her notes, and left it there on purpose. It was Lydia's voice. "Brock, she knows about the brownfield credits. I need to accelerate the timeline. If she changes the trust before she dies, we lose the whole thing. Can you file the preliminary zoning challenge this week? I need the property to look contested so the value estimate drops before probate." A pause on the recording. "And I need the conservatorship filing ready to go the day after she's gone. Not a week after. That day." I stopped the playback. Alderman's expression was very still. Lydia's face had gone the color of old paper. "You were going to file against me the day your mother died," I said quietly. She knew it. She recorded it. "Dad." She also left documentation of $240,000 in forged transfers, and your email correspondence with Mr. Alderman going back 18 months, and a copy of the acquisition agreement he drafted, the one that offered $350,000 for a property worth $8 to $12 million. Alderman took a step back. "That property is held in an irrevocable trust," I said. "Has been for 18 months. You can't buy it, contest it, or reach it through any guardianship order." Cora made sure of that. Another car turned onto the gravel road, a white Subaru, practical and clean. Constance Webb stepped out, briefcase in hand, followed by a younger man in a Holton Associates polo shirt. Constance walked directly toward Alderman and handed him an envelope. "Cease and desist," she said. "You're prohibited from contacting Mr. Bowen, making any offer regarding this property, or conducting any business activity connected to this address. The trust documents specifically name Alderman Capital Group as a prohibited party under the Ethics Clause. Any transaction between your firm and anyone acting on behalf of this estate will trigger immediate federal referral." Alderman looked at the envelope, then at me. "You'll regret not taking a clean exit." "I doubt it," I said. He walked back to his car. Constance turned to Lydia and handed her a second set of documents. "Notice of Trust Ethics Review. If you pursue any legal challenge to your mother's will or trust, attempt to establish conservatorship through any fraudulent claim, or enter into any further business arrangement with Brock Alderman or any entity he controls, you forfeit your entire inheritance. The house, the investment accounts, the retirement annuity, everything reverts to your father. Additionally, all documented evidence of the wire fraud and forgery transfers to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Lydia stared at the papers in her hands. The man from Holton Associates stepped forward. "Mr. Bowen, I'm Neil from the development team. We've completed the county approval process your wife initiated. We're ready to begin site work when you are. First phase revenue projections have the development rights generating between 6 and 9 million over the build-out period, with ongoing commercial lease income beginning in year 3. He handed me a folder with clean, simple numbers on the first page. 6 to 9 million, ongoing lease income. Lydia said nothing. Her husband wasn't there. It was just her standing in the parking lot of a condemned garage she'd never once asked about, holding documents that told her exactly how wrong she'd been. She looked at me once. I don't know what she was looking for. Whatever it was, I couldn't give it to her. She got in her car and drove away. Constance put her hand briefly on my arm. We'll follow up with the development timeline next week. Get some rest. They left. Pete pulled in about 20 minutes later with a 6-pack of water and a bag of chips from his feed store, which I thought was just about the right response to the morning I'd had. We sat on the tailgate of my truck and didn't say much for a while. She going to fight it? Pete asked. I don't know. Probably depends on whether the threat is real enough. Is it? Cora made it real. Pete opened a water bottle and handed it to me. Heard from Sandra Kowalski's office this morning, he said. Alderman's under federal investigation, has been since your wife first contacted them last fall. Today just helped. I looked at him. Cora gave them a lot, he said. She was in contact with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 7 months. Financial crimes, wire fraud, securities manipulation. Alderman's been doing this to other families, too. Yours wasn't the first. I set the water bottle down on the tailgate and stared at the shop sign. Bowen & Sons Automotive in faded blue. My father had painted that sign himself. She never told me, I said. She didn't want you carrying it, Pete said. She wanted you to just be with her. We sat there until the sun dropped behind the grain elevator across the road. Then I went inside, sat at the old desk, and opened my notebook. It took me about an hour to write everything down. What had happened, what Cora had done, what I understood now that I hadn't understood before. At the end I wrote, she spent the last year of her life protecting me. Not just from Lydia and Alderman. From grief, from isolation, from the version of the future where I ended up in the shared room in Platteville with nothing left. She built something for me to walk into. All I had to do was show up. The development broke ground that spring. Neil and his team were thorough and patient with me, explaining every phase like I had a say in it, which, it turned out, I did. The trust gave me final approval on all major decisions. Cora had written that in specifically. She knew I'd want to be useful. The first commercial tenant signed a lease on the East Bay space before the building was even finished. A regional brewing company wanted the historic bones of the shop, the exposed cinder block, and the old overhead doors. They called it the character. I called it the thing I'd been looking at for 40 years. A second tenant followed, a law office, then a small accounting firm. By the end of the first year, the building was generating steady monthly income, and I was living in the apartment we'd built above the original office, which was the only part of the project where I'd pushed back on Neil until he agreed with me. I kept the pegboard with the socket wrenches. Pete came by every Tuesday. Sometimes he just dropped off coffee and left. Sometimes we sat in the apartment and watched the Brewers game, and he told me things about Cora I hadn't known. Little moments from her visits to the shop over the past year, things she'd said, the way she'd looked at the building. She was proud of this place, he told me once. She didn't talk about the money or the development. She talked about you, Dad, about you working here in high school. She said this building was the truest thing about your family. I thought about that for a long time. Brock Alderman was indicted that October. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy. 3 other families had been defrauded through similar schemes in Iowa and Minnesota. The federal case was broad. Cora's documentation was, according to the assistant U.S. attorney, some of the most organized evidence they'd ever received from a private citizen. Lydia testified under a cooperation agreement. She kept the house at Whitetail Lake. She kept the investment accounts. She lost her business license in Wisconsin, and her husband left her 6 months later. Last I heard from Constance, who still tracked these things on my behalf. She was living in the house alone and working remotely for a company in Chicago. I didn't contact her. She didn't contact me. There's a bench at the edge of the back lot now facing east toward the fields. I put it there myself last September, with a small brass plaque bolted to the back. Cora Jean Bowen, 1960-2023. She saw what no one else could see, and she trusted it. I sit there most mornings with coffee when the weather allows. Sometimes I watch the delivery trucks come and go from the brewery. Sometimes I don't watch anything. Last spring, I started a small scholarship fund through the Grant County Community Foundation. Cora grew up in this county. She went to the technical college in Lancaster on a borrowed tuition payment from her aunt, and she never forgot that. The scholarship is for kids from Grant County who want to study engineering, business, or the trades. First year, we gave out 4 awards. At the ceremony, one of the recipients, a 17-year-old named Ada, who was heading to Madison to study civil engineering, came up to me afterward and said she'd read about what the building had been. An old garage. She said she thought that was the best kind of origin story. I told her my wife would have agreed. I'm 65 now. Some days the apartment above the shop is the most alive place I've ever lived in. Some mornings I wake up and forget for just a second that Cora isn't downstairs. Then I remember, and I get up anyway, and I make coffee, and I walk out to the bench. The building she saved is full of people. The scholarship she imagined is in motion. The man who tried to take everything is in a federal courtroom. And I'm here. That's what she left me. Not a building, or a development deal, or a bank account. She left me a reason to still be here. Useful and present and not finished. When everyone else saw a condemned garage at the end of a gravel road, she saw something worth fighting for. She trusted it. I'm still learning to trust it too, but I'm getting there. One morning at a time, one cup of coffee, one Tuesday with Pete, one scholarship check at a time. She saw it. I just had to open the door. I keep coming back to one moment. Not the morning Helen handed Brock Alderman the cease and desist. Not the day the federal indictment came through, just a quiet afternoon in the shop office, sitting in that old chair that creaked like it remembered me, reading Cora's letter on the cold concrete floor of the storage room. She had written, "Set the trap." 2 words, and in those 2 words I understood something about her that I hadn't fully seen in 40 years of marriage. Cora was the smartest person I ever knew, not in the way people say that about someone they love. I mean it in the plainest sense. She saw around corners. She understood that the world doesn't always reward the good and punish the bad on its own schedule, so she spent the last year of her life making sure the schedule was set correctly. She didn't rage, didn't confront, didn't collapse. She documented, planned, filed, and then she went home and held my hand and let me read to her. That kind of clarity under that kind of pressure is something I don't think I'll ever fully understand. But I spent a lot of mornings on that bench trying to... What Lydia did was a choice. I've had to sit with that. She wasn't desperate, wasn't confused, wasn't misled. She was calculating, and she started calculating before her mother was even gone. Every dollar she moved, every email she sent to Alderman, every brochure she tucked into that folder, those were decisions. And every one of them said something about what she valued and what she didn't. You can be raised well and still choose badly. That's a hard thing for a father to write down, but it's true, and pretending otherwise doesn't change it. I think about what I could have done differently, and I always come back to the same answer. Not much. I couldn't have made her into someone she didn't want to be. What I could do, what I did do eventually, was refuse to be the version of myself she was counting on. The confused widower who signed whatever was put in front of him. The old man too tired to push back. She had that version of me mapped out. Cora made sure I became a different one. There's something that happens when you stop being afraid of the thing you were afraid of. I was afraid of being alone, of being without money, of being without money, of being put somewhere and forgotten. Those fears were real. Lydia knew they were real, and she used them. But the moment I drove down that gravel road and put the key in that lock, I stopped being afraid of the building. And once I stopped being afraid of the building, I stopped being afraid of her. That's not bravery in the dramatic sense. It's just what happens when you finally show up to the thing you've been avoiding. Pete still comes by on Tuesdays. He brought coffee this week and we watched the first snow come down over the east field. He didn't say much. That's one of the things I like about him. He understands that some things don't need commentary. Ada sent a note last month from Madison. Midterms behind her, she said. First lab project submitted. She signed it the way her generation signs things, just her name, no formality. I pinned it to the pegboard next to the socket wrenches. Cora would have liked that detail.